Hello and welcome to Enemy Within Radio, going out live on truthfrequencyradio.com. Saturday, the 6th of June, 2015. Today we are joined by Marid MacDonald and James Horak. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Do you want to introduce yourselves? James first. Tell the people a little bit about your research and field of talking.
Well, I'd rather just let that come out as we get into what material we may cover today, because there is a lot of conjecture about what and who I am. So I'd rather relay that by giving some substance to what I have to say more than anything else.
Would it be a good place to start, James, with the title of your blog, the EMV's blog spot? Can you explain to our listeners what EMVs are, where they come from?
Well, that's a question I can't answer entirely, but they're throughout the universe. They're in any system where there's complex life that has a chance of developing culture. They protect these sentient beings or potentially sentient beings from their star. All the stars are fusion stars, and they can expel CMEs at any time if that energy that they possess is not formed, FARMED. And that's what EMVs primarily do, and they will sometimes even intervene to protect a planet that has a direct path with its CME headed for it.
And is that happening on Earth at present? Are we being protected by the EMVs?
Earth wouldn't be capable of hosting sentient life to the point of culture or civilization if you were not. I have figured out a long time ago, and there are other people, mostly astrophysicists, that have conjectured about this, but I figured out pretty precisely how often a devastating CME should hit a planet like the Earth in a position with its star, such as Earth is with the Sun. Over a period of 17 years, there should be at least one CME that decimates the side of the Earth that it hits at the time of approach. And of course, the devastation will be so severe that the rest of the life will be decimated in time, in short time, less than a month.
Mm-hmm. So the EMVs, from what I understand I've been listening to your broadcast for several years now. I think it was 2011 when I first started listening. And if you're listening, Brian, thanks for putting me on to James. The phrase EMVs was coined by Dr. Norman Bergram in the book The Ringmakers of Saturn, wasn't it?
That's right. I defer that to Dr. Bergman because he was a well-established scientist that stepped out of the secrecy, that stepped out of the box that they put these people in to talk about what he had really found and how it related to the rings of Saturn, and how that in one case specifically, he actually found one of the larger rings of Saturn, the A ring, being completed by the EMVs.
Wow. So modern science these days, it strikes me, we've talked about this quite a lot on air, how modern science isn't really science anymore at all. It's like modern history and also religion. It's pretty much pure dogma, isn't it?
Well, there are two different sciences. There's one that's reserved for the second or hidden technology, and then what you get that feeds the pulp to the mass media that uses it politically.
Mm-hmm. Something I've also heard you talk about at great length, which fascinates me, and it seems to be a big buzzword in the alternative media at the moment, and that's the buzzword of consciousness. And you talk at great length about unified and split consciousness. Could you explain that a little to the listeners, please?
ET and members of the ET community, which is called the extended community, have unified consciousness. You are the only sentient life that has a split consciousness. It has a consciousness are a dual consciousness as the subconscious and the conscious minds that are at war with each other, and it causes a great deal of problems and ambivalence. In unified consciousness, you have direct access to the collective consciousness, into the genetic memory that you have but can't access. And the reason you can't access it is the key to both is the conjoining of both consciousness, the subconscious and the conscious mind. When they're at war with each other, they're ineffectual in that respect. Every once in a while, people with split consciousness get a window into either the collective consciousness or genetic knowledge, but it's brief. And, of course, it leads to some kind of anomaly that you hear about, as a legitimacy to it in most cases. But the unified consciousness individual is not going to practice aberrancy, not going to do certain things, and can't do them by order of the evidence that you see in the skies above you. You see clear evidence that there are ET civilizations that are sending people here in their ships. This couldn't be possible if they had either personal or collective aberrancy.
So is this split consciousness something that we on Earth need to overcome if we're to travel among the stars?
I used to think so, but I'm not so sure anymore because I have seen elegance to the split consciousness that I wouldn't have accounted a few years ago. But I have changed in that perspective.
So when we dream, James, is that partly a conversation going on between the unconscious and the conscious? Is that it trying to put through ideas? Or
a lot of it's biofeedback, but you have lucid dreams where I think that's occurring. I don't dream, so I can't say from firsthand knowledge. I can just simply say that I'm amazed at the capacity that you have of compensating for that split consciousness, and I have seen so many good people that would be far from aberrant, just as far from aberrancy as those with unified consciousness. So the problems that you're facing are not just a matter of the split consciousness. That complicates things, certainly, but that alone is not responsible for it.
But it's been compromised as well. It's been used.
It's been opportunized by a caste system that has stagnated, that has become so corrupt, so rotten, that it's beyond persuading to be otherwise.
And do you think we're at a point in evolution where we need to get rid of these psychopathic monsters that are controlling the planet?
You either do or you will soon perish. Fukushima was the handwriting on the wall for you. And just look around you. You have a number of reactors throughout the world that are not just not being maintained as they should be, and the spent fuel not being guarded and disposed of adequately, but stored in places that are just as critical as where these reactors are. And they're posing problems, and some have already started developing them. But the main thing that's so pressing now is that the policy of the U.S. State Department has destabilized so many areas and created so many enemies that the perfect weapon is not a hydrogen bomb or a neutron bomb or a plague or whatever else you can foment upon your enemy, but somebody carrying a small briefcase, walking into one of these areas where a reactor is, and starting off the same thing that happened at Fukushima. So this is what you've got multiplied 100 times in the nations that possess these nuclear reactors. And they all need to be shut down. They need to be coffined. And, right now, the only way that can be obtained, the only way it can be done, since the damage has gone as far as it has, is with help from the outside. And by that, I mean by ET communities.
They admitted at Fukushima not that long ago that, and, we knew this anyway, but they're coming out and saying that they don't have the technology to fix it. The genie is out the bottle. It was out the bottle in 2011. People do not realize how bad it is and was. I mean, I was one of them. I was kind of distracted by other things. And of all people, being an anti-nuclear person for quite some time, I kicked myself. I remember obviously the earthquake, the tsunami, and Michi, Kaku, whatever, saying, it's Keystone Cops. I remember that, but my sister was ill at the time. She passed away, and I just wasn't on the ball. So I did a lot of research to catch up, and I just wept. And I know other activists who, when it was going on, just sat and wept because they knew that they had not contained it, and they were using, and still are using, the Pacific as a dumping ground. It's virtually on a swamp where Fukushima is. It's leaking, it's seeping into the aquifers. They didn't evacuate the people. They didn't evacuate the children. These children have now got thyroid nodules. They've got cancers. And that's just in Japan. We have to remember the jet stream. We have to remember how quickly that fallout was brought over the Northern Hemisphere. Chernobyl was bad. Fukushima is 50 to 100 times, 300 times worse.
1,000 times.
1,000 times worse. Okay,
yes.
Thank you, James. Because I always get, I always feel I'm exaggerating, but I know.
Well, what people forget, Marit, is that we have had fission going on, atmospheric fission going on, and there are isotopes that both involve hot particles and long half-lives are severe enough in their short half-lives that we've never seen before, that we couldn't imagine the extent and the variety that could have been created. But the longer it goes on, the more that these are going to react with elementals already there, they're going to feed it. Mm-hmm. They invented a word to hide the fact, to avoid what they had already, back in the 50s, defined as the China syndrome. What happens and what this suggests is that this is self-implementing after a certain point. When you reach a certain temperature, what happens becomes self-implementing with respect to nuclear fuel, or what is potential nuclear fuel, and it doesn't stop. And that's what you have now. So they have created a problem that even if the resources were diverted to solving the problem, couldn't. So that's why I say, unless you get off-Earth help, there's nothing else can be done. It's just a matter of time. And it's worse than what you can imagine because it will become exponential at a certain point. And it already has created Earth upheavals on a scale that has never been seen before.
Okay, James, you say there that unless we get off-world help, we're pretty much doomed. What can we do as individuals and as a collective to try and get that off-world help?
You have to change your leadership. You have to reverse certain trends and show that you are capable of being stable. You're capable of hosting a stable society that doesn't weaponize every damn thing you touch. Then it's given you. And the people that have been contacted here in an official stance know how to get in touch with these people. There's no big secret to it. They know what I'm talking about. And they'd better do it. And they better stop the depopulation. They better stop everything that points to that you should be given no help. You should be given no concern or even sympathy. And until the last few years, that was pretty much the attitude of the extended community, and it's changed somewhat too. But still, you have to do what you can for yourself. Nobody's going to give you a carrot for doing the right thing that should have been done all along. That's just not the way.
So we need to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
That's right. You need to put the people that are responsible for the problems out of power. I'm not saying kill them. A lot of them, are just people that are thinking they're making a living or making a high standard of living for their family or whatever. They're totally out of it. Totally out of it. It's like in the military, when after you kill so many people, killing is no big deal, is it? Well, this is what you've got with people that are taking more than they have a right to take, committing criminal acts, but are doing it with impunity, given to them by the government itself, by the agencies of the government, to do things like drugs, traffic in drugs, launder drug money, and so forth. I mean, this has become coin of the realm.
Yes. I mean, see now, there are a lot of people, they seem to be putting aside the infighting that's going on between the people who are trying to get this truth out and coming together. I mean, we've done a couple of interviews recently, and we did one this week on People's Internet Radio from Ireland. And do you think that kind of coming together, the actions that are happening, like, for instance, Patrick Cullinan's mass indictments at the Royal Courts of Injustice on June the 15th, the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, do you think those will be enough, or do you think it requires something more drastic?
I'm fond of quoting a passage from Memoirs of a Revolutionary by Pyotr Kropotkin, Prince Pyotr Kropotkin. What he says is very interesting. He says it's not ideals, it's not values that create a revolutionary. It's the police. Actually, he should have said it's police brutality. This is the most polarizing of all things. The United States has polarized nations in the Middle East. That's why you have people that will feed CIA organization or CIA-created organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. There are a lot of people going in there with ideals. They're going in there with whatever, but mainly what's driving them is they've seen their family members killed, tortured by policy, by the policy making of the United States State Department, who is servile to oil interests in this laundering drug money. You see, they have to prop up the economy and the American dollar prophylactically, and this is how they do it, because they've sold American jobs, American industry. And so when's the last time you heard of the phrase balance of payments deficit, which any good economist knows about? You may not, because it hasn't been in the media in 20 years.
No, I've noticed that suddenly seemed to, well, not suddenly, it gradually just appeared. When I was a kid and when I was in my teens and 20s, it was on the news every day, every night, balance of payments deficit. Now,
just look at yourself. You were a better economist then yourself than you are now, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Weren't you? Yeah.
Well, it does seem to me that we've all been dumbed down and we've all fallen victim to a greater or lesser extent. I'm just glad now that I'm kind of starting to see what is really going on in the world.
Well, imagine what's been done to our precious children.
Mm-hmm.
And still, there's so many of them that you can approach. I've talked with them and everything. They still reserve this spark, this love of truth, this clarity that they strive for. They're more spiritual in many ways than are we.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, truly spiritual, not this woo-woo crap that people throw out. It's like one of the close friends and associates that Myra and I have, Crystal Clark. She says it very well. How can you claim, even represent yourself as spiritual when you don't have any morality, when you don't have moral outrage over what's being done to you and your children? You can't be.
So people are encouraged to suppress their emotions and their righteous anger at things. If you look at Kevin Blanche, who's an incredible activist, anti-nuclear activist, has been for a long time, who's fighting to get Fukushima awareness out there. His father was one of the veterans. He was a Marine, and he was one of the ones that they picked up one day and took him out to the desert and nuked them. You can see it on film. And he subsequently died of AML leukemia. Years later, Kevin watched it happen. So you can imagine how he was formed by that experience. And he is just full of anger and rage and passion. And I love him for it.
Yes.
If there was more people doing that. You know what I mean? It's not wrong to get angry. It's not wrong to rant at the camera and say this, we need to stop these people. We have to do something. Nobody else is going to do it for us. Kevin's doing this on his own, entirely on his own. He's going off to Vienna, and he wants to go literally toe-to-toe with the IAEA, which is one of the nuclear alphabet soup agencies. Apologists, yeah. And I'm looking forward. If I had the money, I would get on a plane and be there to stand next to him, because it's come to that. People need to be outraged about the fact that their food is compromised. You can't trust a doctor, vaccines. There's just so many issues now that I just can't understand how people would prefer to watch EastEnders and live in a soap opera and raise their children like that, you know?
Don't you think the reason a lot of people watch EastEnders and live in their little bubble of, no, I don't believe that, but so it can't possibly be, is because they're absolutely terrified of the reality that is kind of staring them in the face?
Oh, yes, I think you hit a large part of it, and not all of them. But some of them have such a narrow comfort zone that they feel compelled to protect it to stay sane. And, you know, modern psychiatry, which is another farce, has assured them that's true, hasn't it? That their sanity depended upon complicity with policymaking. That compliance was essential because, after all, what is mental illness? Mental illness is being in discord with those around you, right? What if those around you are eating children, sacrificing them, blah, blah, blah?
Yes, unfortunately, that does appear to be going on way more than a lot of people realise. But it does actually seem to be serviced and being made public now, which I think is a step in the right direction.
Well, I celebrate you people in the aisles for your tenacity in bringing that out, for standing up for the victims that are coming forth, because your legal system, your social system has all failed them miserably and been part of the problem, been complicit with it. And, you know, the children... what's so horrible about England in particular is how easy it is to take children.
We're just going to break. We'll be back. Welcome back to Enemy Within on truthfrequencyradio.com with our guests, Mara MacDonald and James Horak. Just before the break, James, you were talking about what is happening to our children and people coming out, whistleblowers, and finally some justice may happen now.
Yes, in fact, I'm amazed at some of the heroes that you have involved in this, how far they've gone and the sacrifices and risks they've taken. It is very compelling. You have the Secrecy Act. You have all kinds of other little nuances of the Secrecy Act that you have to operate under. And, of course, all of it infringes upon the right of free speech. But in this case, it infringes upon any kind of methods you might use to correct a great evil, not just a social evil. You know, we are all, if we are right, if we're good people, we all have a compulsion to protect and defend children, not just our own children, but children. So I would love to see these spokespeople be able to reach the public for this to create the reaction that is innate in all of us. Good people, not monsters, not people that have lost their humanity for whatever reason or been worked on from childhood to be monsters, to be without sympathy, to be without empathy, to be without anything that would create the human values essential for the species to survive.
In the US, just going over the pond, Obama said before he came into power that he would actually promote and encourage whistleblowers. And Obama's had the biggest crackdown on whistleblowers out of any president.
Yeah, relatively, yes. Of course, it was done in England long before it was done in the United States because they got your guns. Mm-hmm. In every nation where they have achieved that, what has happened? Moved towards a more totalitarian state has occurred. And, you know, no one better epitomizes that than the stupid mouth of your prime minister. Cameron is the, I mean, my God, man, the thing he comes out with saying, you know, he is a step away from thought policing.
Well, the things that he's saying are straight out of Kim Jong-un's book. No longer can we be passive against people who merely follow the law. That's what he's saying. So following the law is not good enough anymore. We're going to snoop
No.
on you. We're going to check out all your information. We're going to have access to everything, even though you haven't broken the law. But we live in a surveillance state in the UK. London has the most cameras out of any city in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, I think that it's a strange admixture. I think that one of the things that is very relevant to this is the Talmud, because a lot of what is coming out of Whitehall right now is related more to the Talmud than it is to Young's book. And, it's all hidden. In other words, they have done everything they could here in the States to make Obama look like he's a pro-Islam. But no one has tried to carry on and increase the fronts in the Middle East against good Muslims than Obama. So who is pulling his strings? It isn't Islam.
Well, I think it would give people a big clue if they were to check out who in the British government and in the American government, because they both seem a fairly similar level, who has dual citizenship with Israel.
Exactly.
They all have, don't they?
Yeah.
Or the ones who are close to power.
Look at who was chief of staff in the White House under Obama, right even to some degree into his second term. It was Rahm Emanuel, who is maintaining dual citizenship, whose father is a Talmudic rabbi, who has done everything he could to upset the status quo where Christians are concerned. It was so bad that the staff of the White House couldn't get along with him, so Obama kicked him upstairs and managed to get him in as mayor of Chicago, which is a big political plum. So if you are mayor of Chicago, you run Illinois, and that's where most automobiles are made. So he's got that, and then Silverstein comes in and manages to acquire the Sears building. And that's very significant to followers of 9/11 conspiracy, because this building was built at the same time the World Trade Centers were built. And according to one authority on the subject, it was fitted out with a nuclear device to prove that it could be brought down with controlled demolition with the least damage to the surrounding structure. And the way to do it, the way that they did with the World Trade Center and the way they did specifically with this, was install a nuclear device at the time they were built to get the building permit. So, I guess Silverstein hasn't made enough money with the $4 billion that he made off of the World Trade Centers coming down.
That was a pretty lucky coincidence, having both buildings insured for 2 plane strikes, though, wasn't it?
Yes. And on and on. And the deeper you get into it, you always want to, if you are a person who is trying to really try to figure out what goes on when anything like that happens, because of what it takes to do it and then whitewash it, you want to look at who benefited most from it being done. It certainly wasn't the Arabs.
Do you think this, is it 28 pages of secret documents that seem to implicate the Saudis? Do you think that's just a distraction?
Well, the Saudis were involved. There's no doubt about that, but it was a Mossad organized effort, and Zionists are profiting from it most.
Well, anybody who's looked at a big range of 9/11 films, and they'll see the footage of the dancing Israelis, won't they?
Well, they knew exactly when it was going to happen. They were ready to film it because they wanted a souvenir. That's how people are, even monsters. But they don't, once you understand what's in the Talmud that they follow, you understand that they don't consider us human. We're beasts of burden. We're put on the face of the earth to serve them.
Mm-hmm. When we talked last week, you did mention Field McConnell, and I know that Field has put out a lot of work there on 9/11 with particular reference to the Pentagon, because he's got a lot of synchronous connections to that. And he seems to be of the belief that all these mass casualty events are actually filmed as a kind of snuff film that is traded around the world amongst these elites. I mean, can something that sick be really true?
I'll tell you, there is no limit to their sickness. I wouldn't put that past them. They'll exploit it every way they can. The same way that a farmer exploits his cattle, exploits his pigs and so forth, only with more deviance. And that's nothing compared to what a Talmudic rabbi made a video and was claiming and throwing it in the face of us Gentiles and saying, well, you won't believe it, so I can say this with impunity because you are too stupid to be anything but incredulous. And
is that Rabbi Finkelstein?
Yes, you know what I'm talking about then, don't you?
Yeah, yes.
Now, that's about as outrageous as you can get, isn't it?
Yes, we kill the children and mince up the flesh and put it in a sausage at McDonald's, and you're too stupid to realize you're eating your own children, yes.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. If you know what they really worship, which they'll say Lucifer, if you know what that represents, Lucifer was a fallen angel. If you know what that represents, then you will know that that is to their own glory in their eyes. You see, they have two methods of operation, and that's one of them. The other one is to telegraph what they're going to do firsthand, so they're acquitted of any guilt. Let's take an offshoot from that. What is the ceremony that goes on at a certain...
Cremation of care.
Yes. Cremation of care. What does that mean?
I'm just saying Bohemian Grove.
Yes, what does it mean? Cremation of care. What does it mean to you?
Well, basically, I look at it as burning away any care. So this is what these elites, this is what they stand by. They don't have any care. It's a kind of a psychopath point of view over thing, a sociopath. So,
well, how did the English aristocracy before Napoleon and the French aristocracy do it?
Well, it's kind of like looking at somebody like Tony Blair or George Bush Jr., who's responsible for so many deaths. And you think, how can this guy sleep at night? Because he's burnt away on his care. He doesn't care whatsoever. He's a sociopath type of person.
Well, now again, how did the English aristocracy and the French aristocracy do this cremation of care type thing before Napoleon? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Hunting the maiden.
Ah.
You know what that entailed?
Please tell us.
You take a virgin, strip her, and hunt her with dogs like they do fox and stag.
Huh. So is fox hunting a representation of that, just as the cremation of care is burning an effigy of a child and it was actually a real child? Once over.
Yeah, very similar. Very similar. It's the same spirit of the hunt. But, of course, you have to always understand that there are sons and daughters of the elite that don't participate in this sort of thing and may not even fully realize that it's done. So you have the eldest that's getting everything because they recognize primogeniture. They want to return us back to feudalism only under corporate rule now, which is even worse.
Yeah, you can look up the pictures on the California Archive, people, this Bohemian Grove, and you can actually see them carrying out the cremation of care. The year is a little bit blurry. It's between 1912 1919, but they're actually sacrificing a real child.
Yes.
You mean that's actual footage or photographs?
It's photograph in the California Archive.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yep.
And so that would be just at the end of the First World War?
They're not sure of the year. So it's basically between 1912 and 1919, but it's a small black child that's been sacrificed in the cremation of. There's a bunch of other photos of Bohemian Grove, nothing really going on, just the people there. There's one of a guy being hung there as well. That's the only two nefarious pictures, that the hanging and the cremation of care with a real child being sacrificed.
I think one of the mechanisms that people need to understand, because this is very horrible, You have to understand what the purpose is. You have to understand the mechanism going on with this. When you get into a secret society, the first thing that they do is perform ceremonies. And these ceremonies, the further in you get in and the more trusted you are, they get worse and worse and more bizarre until you are committing a criminal act that is then a blackmail card to keep you in line. Then you're fully trusted and you're fully a member. And until that happens, you're not. In other words, this Satanism or Luciferianism or whatever you want to call it constitutes you being enveloped to the extent that you have committed a criminal act by which you can be prosecuted and which you will be if you ever step out of line, and they'll have everything they need to win a case against you in court.
Sorry, I believe that the pictures were a little bit earlier, 1906 to 1909.
It's about right.
If you search on Google for California Bohemian Grove Archive, it's the top link. I looked a long time ago, and that photo of the cremation of care with the real child is actually on our page on Facebook, Enemy Within Radio, or one word if people want to look it up.
I'm just curious about the historical timing leading up to the First World War, as if there wasn't enough of a sacrifice.
Well, it was acquired by the leading Bohemian of the time, Bohemia Grove.
I was confused because I think it was another site put it at 1914. But
yeah,
all the photos are there. I think there's 54 photographs there, so you can look them up. It's oasc.cdlib.org.
Well, all this methodology, as bizarre as it is, all of it was the brainchild of the Tavistock Institute there in London. Yeah. So I'm going to blame it all on you guys.
Well, we were doing it centuries before your country.
Yes. In fact, one of the things that's interesting is that you know that there have been archaeologists over the years that have found indication that the Druids and that here in the United States that different southwestern cultures resorted to cannibalism on a scale. And, of course, we know that the Mesoamerican Indians that were monument builders like the Aztec and Mayan resorted to that. It was ceremonial cannibalism, but it became a lot more than that after it progressed. In fact, after the sacrificial victim had his heart cut out and the priest bit into it, if he was a vampire priest, that's what they called him, then the legs and arms would be cut off and thrown down the steps of the pyramid or temple, and they would be sold at market. And one of the interesting things, if you ever go to Mexico City, there is the Palace of Art. And you go over to the Palace of Art, in the Palace of the Government Palace, there are murals, Diego Rivera murals, and they will depict this in the murals.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just at the moment in the process of finishing off Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. Hopefully we're going to get Graham on September time when his new follow-up book comes out. And the level of depravity seems amazing. But from what I can gather, that kind of behaviour, it was around before the arrival of the Viracochas, the bearded men who came over the sea on the boats that shone like fish scales. I mean, are they remnants of a previous higher civilization, James?
I wouldn't say higher. I wouldn't attribute anything like that to a higher civilization. No.
No, I mean, the Viracochas actually stopped this behaviour and taught men to live in peace. And it wasn't until the Viracochas left that they resorted back to the cannibalism and barbarism.
That's mixing two myths into one. The Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl predicted that if you don't change, if you don't stop this, there will be people from the east that will come and they will stop you. And, of course, the Mayan priests, by the time that this had happened after the conquest, 30 or 40 years, they could see no difference in the brutality of the Spaniards than they could in their governing that utilized human sacrifice. Now, the Spanish were appalled by what they found and destroyed as much of the evidence as they could out of repulsion. But How does that differ from the Spanish Inquisition?
No, it does seem that many of the ills of the world that we live in today can be traced pretty much directly back to the Vatican, doesn't it?
Well, that and one other thing. Cortez told Moctezuma as he's cutting his hands off something very interesting. He told him, he said, "We Spaniards suffer from a disease of the heart for which only gold is the cure."
Huh.
And truer words are never spoken.
I mean, this quest for gold seems to overcome any sort of morals or spiritual leanings. Is that connected at all to the use of monatomic gold?
No. Monatomic gold is another thing. Now it takes quite a bit of gold to make monatomic gold. Mm-hmm. And then you can't be assured. I mean, there's so many things that you have had in the past that you've lost, technologically lost, like the ability to make electrum. You can't make electrum because you don't know the right percentages. And there was a show that Kevin Smith did with a gentleman who would go out and investigate implants. And he went to this home where this lady had a daughter, a young daughter, a child. And she was visited one night by what seems to be EBs that placed these little electrum spheroids in her nose. Didn't implant them, just put them in her nose, and you could blow them out. And so the mother, next morning, the child wakes up and she remembers what happened to her, unlike abductions. So this is very significant. So she asks the little girl to blow her nose, and out comes these little balls. And so she loses them. They come back the next night and do it again. And, you know, what they're doing, if they had done it and done what I recommended, they would have taken these to a metallurgist, and there probably was enough using different methods, not the fire assay method, but others, for them to determine the proper ratio, and they would have recaptured the formula for knowing the proper ratio of making electrum. People that have tried to make it don't have the precise formula, although it is in some alchemical works in the Vatican that, you know, is so far back in the archives, so far back in the secret archives of the Vatican, they probably haven't come to light in 300 years. But nonetheless, that was an attempt by ET to try to get, well, like they do with the crop circles, to try to get you a little hint about what's going on and how to change your concept of physics to more accommodate the truth and the reality.
While we're on that subject, James, can you clarify for people the difference between EBEs and ETs? Yes,
well, you talk about EBs like you thought they were sentient. You thought that they were ETs. They're not. They're not sentient. They're chunks of meat sewn together with a computer terminal. And I'm talking about the grays, what most people think ETs are, and they're not. Of course, they serve the New World Order when it wants to represent ETs as hostile and fearful and to implement the final step in the New World Order, in implementing the New World Order. You know, you don't have to take my word for this. This is what Werner von Braun told Carol Rosin years ago. And he was up on what they were up to. This is something that they've been planning ever since before the end of World War II. The mechanism for trying to conquer the world through banking and different scams actually began before World War I. It was the World League, the World Bank, all of these things. And, of course, there were people that fought it, like William Cullen Bryant. All of these people came to the fore. And when they saw things heading in that direction, they would stand up. When they wanted to move off the gold standard to the silver standard, he stood up and said, "No, we will not be crucified on a cross of silver." Today, we can understand in retrospect what he meant, but everybody thought he was crazy then.
Mm. So when did they start to actually use the EBs? I mean, would you say the EBs are almost like part of the second technology or influence the second technology?
No, what the EBs are...
On the break, sorry.
Okay.
Welcome back to the second half of Enemy Within, live on truthfrequencyradio.com, 6th of June 2015, with our guests James Horak and Marid MacDonald. Just before the break, you asked Marid, do the EBVs represent the second wave of technology, I believe?
Well, I was wondering if they, when they started or found them or started working with them, if they would be classed as that or an influence upon second technology, because people talk a lot about reverse engineering and that sort of thing. I was just wanting James to comment on that.
Well, EBs have been here 25,000 years. This is their last refuge. They are problematic. They have caused problems elsewhere, and ET is removing them. If it wasn't for humans here protecting them, giving them subterfuge, they would be removed. In fact, that's what the subject of the conversation was between Eisenhower and two ETs that visited him in that famed meeting. They offered to remove the EBs, which are problematic. And, of course, the military that happened to be there at the time protested and said, yeah, but will you give us technology? And they said no. Of course, the technology they were talking about was weapons. No. And they deferred and ended up turning down an offer that would have made a great deal of difference. But EBs are used. They are used to cover what's really going on with the so-called abductions. They will be used to create the illusion of a hostile alien attack. They have acquired some technology from them. They have acquired a few things, but they can't, even then, the drive in their vehicles and how to make the metal that the vehicles are composed of are so vastly far beyond anyone, including EBs, because EBs are like an automaton, only not quite an automaton, and they were devised for deep space exploration by a peoples that were too humane to send sentient life off into deep space, never to return, but this information back on what they found. So after this civilization aspired to a higher level of existence, they made every attempt to round up the EBs and dispose of them, and they didn't get them all. And they can make more of their own kind. So that's basically the use that they have for some of the things they do, and the mutilations that you see and whatever. Some of it's genetic research done by covert black ops. Some of it's done by getting the necessary tissues to make more of their own kind. But they have no personality. They have no reproductive organs. And this is one thing that I've tried to get along with other people, no matter how high you aspire, whether evolution or genetic enhancement. One thing you never do is get rid of your means of pleasure. And so that should demonstrate something to you about what I'm saying and the truthfulness of what I'm saying.
You've been talking about the technology being used here on Earth, and I wanted to ask, do you think this technology is being used to create the stealth fighter, the stealth bomber? The reason I ask is during the Kosovo War, there was actually a stealth fighter, a US stealth fighter was shot down. Now, that stealth fighter was transferred quickly to Russia, and there was a spokesman on the news at the time, and he said a very interesting thing. He said, oh, we're not worried about that because they can't replicate the metal.
Well, the stealth fighters don't have that metal. What the metal is beyond any ability here to produce. It has to be produced in the presence of a star, very close within the corona of a star. This metal passes off heat as quickly as it picks it up. It's capable of being ionized and providing an environment inside the craft that is friendly to the beings inside it, protecting them from the G-force that the maneuvers of the craft will make, protecting them from the ionic bombardment and cosmic bombardment coming from other stars in our sun, and protecting them mostly from the Van Allen belt. So If you don't have the metal, you don't go anywhere with anybody inside you. Simple as that. Of course, that has been done to some extent using EB craft, but that was because ET would have the common respect and decency not to fire on an EB craft that had a human in it, and they know that. But now, since you have begun depopulation and ET has no more reason to show you that kind of consideration, the policy has changed. They will fire on EB craft with humans inside now, trying to escape Earth. Yeah, and have.
Wow. What I was going to ask, James, you mentioned that the EB technology was planned to be used to create a false flag ET invasion. And we've seen, I don't know if you've seen it, but flying around on social media this last week or two, everybody's been saying that the Pope is going to make an announcement of ETs, the reality of ETs on the 5th of June, which was yesterday, and I never saw any announcement. But do you think that's part of that agenda?
It's already been in effect. He's already, or the Vatican or the papacy has already admitted, well, ETs could have souls too, big deal. All of this is, there's some components of the New World Order, like the Pope and the Cardinals, that are conceding to a program that was started back in the 30s called gradualism. It's a methodology. But Obama has gone full steam ahead. I think he's kind of out of control. And Cameron, same way, same thing. They have deserted gradualism to go full steam ahead. And, of course, that is an arrogance they may not be able to afford.
So you're saying that the new Pope, because I remember the other one, I've forgotten his name now, but in it was 2009, 2010, I think he was saying, we need to consider ET as existing, which was quite a shift in perspective for a Pope to come out with that. So this new one is just taking it that little step further with that, planting that.
Well, nobody in the United States attached to any agency can build a credibility for what they have been debunking for the last 50 years. And, they have ruined people's lives, killed people. They've done all kinds of things. They have never done anything effective to actually debunk the existence of ET. What they've done is they have controlled the operation, the way of looking at the potential that ET might be. And in the West, it's always been hostile. It's always been, well, we don't know what they'll do. They may decide to conquer us. That's what we do, So, well, the truth is, they've been here. The one most protracted, long-lasting, and observable flap that has ever occurred was in Colares, Brazil. And you don't ever hear about it. There was a special done on the History Channel that went into detail about it. It went on for months. There was a military contingent sent down to investigate it while it was ongoing. Everyone in this Delta Island village of the Amazon River, everyone was probed, including the doctor, the lady doctor that was there that thought was all hysteria until it was done to her. And it wasn't an invasive form of probing or anything. In a way it was, but it wasn't like what the abductees describe. And these were people, they used different types of vehicles. Their operation was seen by this military. This one commander who was in charge of the entire unit came forward after 20 years, produced his drawings, and gave his story, and even his contact with one of the ETs. And all of this was shown on this documentary on the History Channel. It caused the Brazilian government and military to open up their files to all the ufologists in Brazil, and they did. They've had disclosure there. But
that was Colares, wasn't it, James?
Yes. Yes.
Wasn't there one
fascinating.
ET that had a mask, or he had to wear a...
Well, that's the thing. This civilization was very advanced, and they were disposed towards what I call spiritual technology. They give up the mortal coil, and they exist in energy. And that energy is very powerful. And so he had to wear a lead mask. And there's another story, and again, Brazil, associated with the same thing. But these were guys that came from outside the extent that is covered by the extended community, wanted to see for themselves what was wrong with the people here and if they could do anything to help. And so they came in and they took, because this island was isolated, they took it and they proceeded to try to find out what was either psychically or biologically wrong with the people on this planet.
James, we've got a question here in the chat room, which I think is perfectly understandable for people coming across your information for the first time. The question is this for real? Now, from what I remember when we spoke last week, you addressed that quite well.
I have no problem with skeptics. I don't care much for cynics, and I usually dispense with them quickly. That is, get them out of my sight, get them out of, because they are not looking for truth. They're looking to retain their comfort zone at all costs, or they're paid. One or the other. And I found this over years and years of dealing on forums and so forth, although I wasn't even coming out with anything like I'm coming out with now. I mean, Dr. Bergman allowed me to point to something and talk about it that I could example, and I could give clarification to, and have a chance of winning credibility with people I couldn't otherwise. So I even try. And that came about due to my being persuaded to be on the Kevin Smith Show. And from then on, I took off. But I'm not seeking publicity. I'm simply trying to get people to see what potentials they have to survive. Because if you don't take advantage of making change when you can and in ways you can conceivably, you're not going to survive. It's not like it hasn't happened before.
We were talking about the Pope earlier on, and another question in the chat room is, what about the rumor that the Pope is preparing to introduce us to ETs?
Well, the Catholic Church has been given the privilege or the status of being the new state religion of the New World Order. And, of course, it's serving its purpose. It's been promised that it will get all the lands and titles it had when it was its most powerful in the 5th century. So that's something to look forward to, isn't it? Ha, ha, ha. But the main issue is one that, until scrutinized closely, the Catholic Church has proven over and over again that it doesn't frown on pedophilia. So how spiritual do you really think they are in terms of Christianity in the Ten Commandments?
The person Andy was talking about who said, is this for real? He's just asked, could James outline his primary sources of information?
Well, you know, I would expect that question, and let me tell you something. People talk about proof on this planet like it existed. Proof doesn't exist on this planet for anybody. There isn't a single scientific principle, a single law that you've ever put into effect that's persisted. They don't persist under scrutiny. They don't persist under application. They don't persist under belief. So you ask me for proof. All I can tell you, if you ask that question, you can't conceive of what my reply would be fitting into your bubble.
Mm-hmm.
It's like what Crystal talks about when she did that amazing interview with you, the talk, which is like a book, really, The Refined Cosmology to Address Cosmic Anomaly. And James talks a lot about anomalies as being the way to investigate what we're talking about. But she talks about being like an ant in a drop of water. You know, you're only going to know the outline of that drop of water. And that's what we're like. Our reality is so heavily controlled and so managed. You know, we don't know our true history, our true origins. We're not told the truth about the moon, for example. We're not told even how many planets there are, that sort of thing. So, you know, it's hard to put into words because I know James really well, and I can imagine how that person who's writing this, is this for real, is feeling, because I felt like that as well. Before I even met Crystal, I felt like that. And I was lucky enough to get in touch with Crystal, and it was through her work that I got in touch with and met James. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I've asked him, he'll testify to this, I've asked him some crazy questions. I've spent hours talking to him and with Crystal as well. And, you know, I've never met anyone like him with the information that he has. And it's not so much about him, it's the knowledge that he is giving us, which we are constantly being diverted from. You know, we're not given proper knowledge on this planet. You see what I mean? It's coming out of that bubble times 100 in order to wrap your mind around some of what he says. But go with it is the advice I would give. Go to the blog, ask questions, and you'll get answers. You might not like them, but you'll get them.
I differ from people that diverge from the popular belief or popular religion or whatever as a guru or as a pundit or whatever. In this way, I'm not asking you to believe in me. Mm-hmm. You know, I am asked, like I was asked by Dr. Bergman, you know, how do you know this? How do you know this? And he kept on and on until I finally told him. That ended my relationship with him, which I sadly could have predicted. But he kept on and on. I wasn't going to back down when I had started making these assertions. I wasn't going to back down and say, like so many people might, well, I don't know for sure, but I do know for sure. And if you must know, I've been around a long time, and I've been all over the place. Now, I can say that, and you probably will have a hard time believing that, especially as extensive as I might mean it. But I'll say this. Listen to what I say. See if it doesn't strike some chord somewhere, somehow with you, and then investigate me further. We have a blog, and we have people come up all the time asking questions, and I try to deal with them all. But I want the information to matter, not me. I'm not looking to sell books. I haven't written a book. I'm not looking to get paid lectures. I'm not cottage industry.
Exactly.
So that should give me some amount of influence.
When we spoke last week, James, you did mention that one thing is that no academic has ever tried to debunk what you're saying.
No, they haven't. And none tried to debunk Dr. Bergman. The people that tried to debunk Dr. Bergman were the UFO gatekeepers, the UFO cottage industry.
You see, this is the thing with the alternative media as it stands now. And I mean, I know you guys are doing a great job, so I'm not, but no.
We're not talking about you, no.
No, but if I can just explain, you know, my experience, I'm trying to come from the sort of viewpoint of the listener at the moment. And I went down so many rabbit holes, it wasn't funny, and was deliberately led there and had a really bad experience over a period of a year in the hands of people that were playing with my mind in a pretty horrendous way. And their agenda was to push and push and push the whole reptilians are coming to get us, or there's rogue reptilians that are helping us. Very similar to people whose names I won't mention, but you know who I'm talking about, that are out there perpetuating these stories in order to keep people again in that bubble, again in that place, again on that wheel that gets them nowhere. And very often away from what's happening politically to their country. You know, while their rights are being taken away, they're sitting there saying, oh, you know, the Anunnaki are doing it, and so-and-so's doing it, and Sitchin was right, and blah, 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 blah. And, you know,
diverting responsibility from the people that are. They're not human beings. I mean, they should be human beings, but of course they're either damaged, they're psychotic. There are different degrees of that, of course. And, you know, it all comes down to what they're introduced to when they're young and have no defense. And then whether or not they'll pull themselves out of it. There are people that have, like Svali did, being in the Illuminati. All of these people that are brave enough to do that were captured before they had any means of defense as children. So, you know, being in an elite family doesn't mean that you're one of these monsters. That means that you exploited. And as soon as you do have some control over your life, what you do then is what counts.
And where do they go? That's the other thing. We need to think about asylum for these people.
I put Snowden up in a penthouse.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody's, for example, broke away from the Illuminati and blew a great big whistle, people need to be ready for that and support that person. Even, no matter what they might have done in the past. Do you see what I mean? Because there's all this kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but I see it on Facebook a lot. It's like, and I feel the same way. They're monsters, these people. I want to see them being held accountable. But what if one of them was to turn around and say, right, enough is enough. I'm going to blow the whistle on everything. And we have to be ready for that and support that, because that could be a way out. That could be another way of bringing it down, bringing the unraveling the tapestry.
I say that the implementers on the inside may be the determinants for how this all concludes. Because once they understand how this has no future, World War III, they're doing everything they can to provoke World War III right now as we speak. Mm-hmm. You think you have a future? Anyone on this planet, anything on this planet has a future after World War III?
No.
And, they have all these biological, chemical weapons. They have all these, forced vaccine, all this stuff, and all of it is designed to poison you so that when they want to pull the trigger, you fall over dead. You think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. All of you, as intelligent as you are, you know what I'm saying. Every word is true. Mm-hmm. I'm not exaggerating.
I'm sorry, we're just going to break. So this is Enemy Within on Truth Freaks Radio. Welcome back to the final section of Enemy Within with James Horak and Mareed MacDonald. Just following up from the questions in the chat room, and it'll lead into what you were just saying before the break. Basically, this guy who's asking for proof, he's asking, how do you know? These are the basic questions that the skeptics are going to ask anyway. You're very open. You said you can go to the blog, you can ask me questions, I'm going to talk back. What would you say, just summarising up on that subject of proof, how do you know?
Well, over the years, I've acquired quite a few things. At one time, I had probably one of the best anomaly collections anywhere, and a number of questions arise. How could I possibly in one lifetime acquire these? How could I know, for instance, before it was discovered that certain things were going to occur? If you go back to some of the radio shows that I did with Kevin Smith early on, and then bring it up in retrospect, you'll see that I didn't exaggerate very much, and I was subjectively prophetic because it's not religious.
James, would this be a good time to just touch on the experiences that you had in the military?
Well, since I was 4 years old, I had problems with ABs. But when I was on the second ship I was on, I was in Sasebo Harbor, Japan, and we had a captain that was not a very nice guy. He was a full bird captain, four-striper. And so he wanted to retire a rear admiral. And he wanted to get an efficiency mark or a hash mark for the ship. So he became very tyrannical and unpredictable. Went down to the crew. We were refueling a carrier at sea, underway. And the people on the carrier didn't attach the hose correctly to the male outlet, and it came off and sprayed a brass band and some admirals that were on the bridge because this is a big celebration going on. So it kind of drove our captain up the wall. And when we came into port, he put my division on duty and kept us on duty. We weren't allowed to eat all day. We worked all day and then through the night. And about 3 a.m, the work was called off, and I was told to take all the gear back to the gear locker. We were working on the well deck of a tanker. And so I noticed these lights coming over the mountains and out from sea, and they form a V. I go to the rail, and they are coming towards me. And so I dispensed with them. And, of course, there were sailors that saw that. I didn't know it at the time. And then it exhausted me. And the next thing I know, I'm coming out from a total exhaustion, and Chief Corpsman is over me. By that time, it's 4:30 or 5 in the morning, and of course, we only have an hour of rest left, and they give me a sedative. So I get in my rack, and the next morning when reveille blows, I jump out of the rack and faint. And so the chief corpsman's over me, and he says, "Okay, Horak, we're going over to the shore." And so he takes me to an infirmary there in Sasebo. They decide that I'm going to go back for a medical discharge. And I say, "I don't want a medical discharge." And they said, "Well, you can't go back to that ship, and we can't change your duty station overseas without sending you back for a medical discharge. So I don't have any choice." And they're not letting me go back to that ship. And they tell me, well, there are all kinds of strange things going on that ship, people getting hurt, and the captain has lost his command. So they send me, after I'm there for a day or two at the infirmary, they send me to Akuska. There's a huge naval hospital. It was the Japanese military hospital during World War II. It's a huge thing. From there, some strange things happened. They send me back to the States aboard a military air transport service plane. The strange things happen on the plane. They send me to Air Force Base there when we hit Long Beach, and I'm put in a ward that's co-ed, just nothing but officers, and they're told to stay away from me. Then they fly me across the country to a Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and it's all aboard a private passenger jet, picked up at a private airport. A limousine comes out, picks me up. They activate a former psychiatrist. It was one of FDR's psychiatrists, Captain Willoughby, a lady. She comes in, I talk to her twice, and then more things, strange things happen.
By strange things, what do you mean? You need to kind of elaborate. I mean, what happened on the ship was that the craft turned up and you have a strong reaction to EBEs.
Starts in the gut. Yeah.
And that's what takes them down.
Yep.
Essentially.
Well, I look at it this way. They're things, chunks of meat sewn together with a computer terminal is what I say over and over again. That's what they are. That's all they are. And they're disgusting. Anything that's task-driven, that's lost its task, is disgusting to me. So I get rid of them.
So what happened in the hospital? When you say strange things, it wasn't more EB activity. It must have been, what was it? You're not going to tell me?
Oh, I'll tell you. Now, you want to know in the Philadelphia Naval Hospital?
Anyone, just so you kind of elaborate. When you say strange things, people will be thinking all kinds of stuff. So,
well, I was given the job of assistant librarian. The librarian was the sweetest lady I've known all my life, Mary Contreras. And she had muscular dystrophy, and to walk, it looked like she was in pure agony. But she was so sweet. And, of course, she was a devout Catholic, and the only person in the world that could have dragged me to a novena. She did. I loved her. But one day she comes in. I'm in charge of the medical library. She comes in and she asks me, "Would you mind going up to the 7th floor and reading to some people, reading?" I said, no. It sounded odd, and I didn't think about it very much, but I would do anything for her. So I said, "Sure, I'll do it." She said, "This is what you'll have to do to get there." So I was given directions on how to get there. So I get a couple of books and poems and stuff and go up. And these are survivors of the Philadelphia experiment.
Yeah.
Say no more.
Did you work that out for yourself, or did they tell you that, or how did it come about that that was confirmed?
When a person doesn't materialize completely in front of you and flashes back and forth like they're going from one dimension to another, you figure it out for yourself pretty fast.
Yeah. And so how did they keep that so secret, the wards? I mean, because there must have been...
They kept them there. That's where they stayed. They didn't go anywhere else. I mean, that was a closed ward, and I didn't see everybody who was in there. I read to about 6 of them. Visited them, and go up there and talk to them, ask them if they want anything from this store. So the people that were nursing them and taking care of them, they must have all been sworn to absolute secrecy then. They were devoted to that's all they did, is tend to them. And they did tell me, "Well, you're making a difference," which made me feel good. But I think because of what happened on that military air transport plane, I think they thought that I could do a lot more than I really did. But there wasn't too much I could do. I could just make them feel better and give them some kind of relief from what they were agonizing.
So basically, with the craft turning up at that time, because I remember talking about this before, it was like they knew you were tired. It was a vulnerable point.
I was vulnerable, but that's when I'm most dangerous to them, not to humans. Wouldn't harm a human for the world, literally.
No.
No ET will.
Now, you wanted to touch on Jade Helm?
Yeah, just touch on that. I thought it would be important for James to talk a little bit about Jade Helm 15.
Well, you have to think of anything like that as how does it serve the intent you know they have? Is it purely fear? Is it a practice run for what they intend to do later? Or is it a potential? I think it's a potential. I think that whatever they're going to do is going to be contingent on what's going on when they either announce something like economic collapse or false flag, the reaction to a false flag. Because, you see, I don't think that most Americans today are going to behave the same way with the next false flag that they could predict would happen with the World Trade Centers. I think the timing, it's impossible for them to do anything at this point without the timing giving it away to smart people. So you see the problem that they have there. So they have this as a contingency. The Jade Helm 15 is contingency. They've got these troops in place, and there may only be 1,200 of them. I think there are more. But there may only be 1,200, but they've got call on all these bases. Now, here in Texas, we have a governor that said, we're going to monitor what you damn fools are doing. And so that may give some credence to a report that's come out that Obama has removed Texas from the Union. Because that's the kind of thing he does. I mean, what does he do? I can't have Syria, so I'm going to mess with Ukraine, right? He's got to punish. I mean, he is so far out of line and out of control that it isn't funny. I mean, how does this serve people that have employed gradualism for 50 years?
I was going to say about Jade Helm, I can't remember the name of the woman who did a really excellent video that Crystal shared, which was more or less demonstrating the full spectrum dominance that they would like to roll out. And I wonder if that's part of it, that they want to test out technology.
Mara, you see, I'm going to tell you something. In 96, they're going to do the same thing. In 96, when they tore down Ranger Stadium to build another one, or in the process, or was it the football stadium? I don't know. But they first of all used it as a practice field for what we're talking about, search and seizure. And they had black helicopters downtown in among the skyscrapers in Fort Worth and all that stuff. Explosions, detonations inside the building or the structure of this massive arena. And since then, there have been several times that the militia and other groups have been on the verge of preparing for the worst. Because, when you remember the H1N1 virus, same thing as the Ebola, same thing as avian flu, or any of these things that they will try to use to mandate vaccines. On and on and on. You call it regimentation, call it anything you want, but they have backed down many times. Many times. There have been several instances where they were preparing to go ahead and implement martial laws, a process for leading into the New World Order, implementation of the New World Order, and employ search and seizure, military search and seizure, house-to-house search and seizure. Bo Greitz, as early as 94, was lecturing about this, and he had been a colonel in the Marine Corps, I think. And he came out because he had been briefed in this. So there have been a number of people. When the H1N1 virus was going on, there was a lady came out of the military to say they want to chip you. That goes along with the mandatory virus, and they'll go house to house, and search and seizure will follow up. Well, that light on these snakes drove them under a rock again. I've seen this happen 3 or 4 times. This is what we're up against now. They may feel more compelled to actually go through with it now than before, and I'm sure they do. But whether they do or not is going to be dependent upon how we reach the public and make them aware of the potential of this. Not to make them fearful, but to make them, if worse comes to worse, prepared for the worst. I don't mind being called an alarmist if my actions help avert what they have planned. When I know they have it planned, I know what they had planned in 2000.
Andy, do you want to address the September situation?
Right. September. Is this the asteroid story?
Well, people have been a bit elusive in the chat room, but there's a lot of talk of big events or something happening in September. Is anything you can see on that, James?
There's all kinds of possibilities, all kinds of directions, just like there have been before. You know, they'll depart even from their Illuminati card deck. They'll depart from projects that have started, you know. But what you look for is what draws together other components, like Obama wants to bring illegal aliens into the military. What's that all about? What was Fast and Furious all about? Arming the gang, the worst drug gang in Mexico. What's that all about? When you start putting these together, what better thugs to have in uniform doing house-to-house search and seizure for you than people that would be more than willing to fire on Americans? You see, I don't think he trusts the military. He has a problem with the military anyway, because a lot take their oath to the Constitution seriously.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people say, oh, well, the military will come in and disarm everybody. But the military are the people. They swear an oath. They've got families in these houses where they're going to take guns away.
Think what they figure out whenever they go to Afghanistan to guard poppy fields. Think about what they figure out then. I have been out, I have base privileges. I'm a disabled vet. And I go out to the base and I talk to people all the time. And if they're not Blackwater, if they're Marines, I'll say, well, I hope you're not going to Afghanistan to protect poppy fields. And they shake their head and say, not if I can help it. They never argue with me. So what we have is a military that a monster would distrust, but not a good American. And, you know, even when recently Joe Biden lost a son, I commiserated with that because his son had served his country. And I made a snide remark, of course, when I said, I sympathize with you. He actually served his country. So that's a little bit of a snide remark, but it depends on how you take it, and I hope he didn't take it the right way.
Plus, there's all those generals he got rid of and senior military personnel. Some of them were nuclear.
That's Obama again. I don't know if Biden is party to that. Of course, when you go so far into a thing, it's suicide to step out of it. And Biden may be in that predicament, but I'd like to think that he is. But, you know, you name one good thing that Obama has done for the American people. Just name one. He is out to destroy this country, just like the Zionists. Even the Christian Zionists, the people that have infiltrated the fundamentalist Christian, like the Southern Baptists and so forth, they don't know what the people that have infiltrated them. There's one, Vendell Jones, who organized the first Christian Zionist convention. And he's put out articles, a little paper that he puts out, where he glorifies the day that Israel helps bring down the United States. And this was true. I read that in one of his papers. I went to a couple of his meetings because that's how you find out the truth. You know, you got to do it. And so I went to it and I listened to him. He claims he gives Torah studies, but he doesn't. So every Thursday night, and if you want to go yourself and see what I'm saying, I'm sure that if you say the right things, you'll get in. But these people rejoice. Obama, the people around him, like Rahm Emanuel was, they rejoice at the idea of destroying this country, tearing it apart, and giving pieces of it to Mexico, pieces of it to Russia, pieces of it this, so that it'll never be able to come back again. That's their idea. That's the New World Order, what it's all about. Even before Obama came along, came down the tube, so to speak.
Andy?
The September issue,
What is it, though? Is this to do with this meteorite, another meteorite story?
I think they're just talking about the outcome of Jade Helm because it's going to last until September. It's going to start in July, and it's going to be almost 2 months. And something very similar is going on in Canada, and there are different reports that I've received on that. Recently, someone posted something going on in Michigan. Now, in Michigan is where there was something that happened years ago when there was a get-together, like a picnic, of militia. I never did find a resolve of this. I looked and looked because if what happened is what is claimed to have happened, you would expect survivors or relatives of survivors to let it out. What's curious is that I had a lot of contact with militia prior to the siege in the Davis Mountains, Folly, which my ex-wife was involved in. So I had warned them about what that was and not to get involved with it and made a difference. So they should know me. I mean, not all of them, but I went out of my way to inform as many as I could. So I got in touch with the local militia that was online, and they couldn't clear this up for me. They never got back with me. So I'm suspicious, but these people are all killed. It's a massacre.
Is there any links you want to give out before the end of the show?
Go to our blog, check us out, see if I strike any chords with you. You don't have to buy me lock, stock, and barrel. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking to consider some of the things I say because it might matter to you later on.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Mareed. Please
Thank you.
Facebook page, Enemy Within Radio, all one word. It's at Enemy Within Talk on Twitter, and it's www.enemywithinradio.com. Same time, same place, Truth Frequency Radio, Enemy Within. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
See you next week. Thank you, James. Thank you, Myred.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. We are TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.